This is the Compass Podcast, where we disrupt our everyday experiences with divine moments. Here's a situation for you. You're leaving church or a restaurant, and as you make your way to the car, you notice someone milling about at the fringe of the parking lot. This person also notices you and starts walking towards you. As he approaches, you notice he's a bit disheveled. His clothes are worn as if he's been in them for quite a while. The context clues are that this is a person in some kind of need. What's running through your head? What's your strategy of response in this moment? Kevin Nye is our guest disruptor on this episode of Compass, and he's going to share how such encounters are windows of opportunity for seeing a bit more clearly the movement of God-inspired justice in the world. We're going to learn a bit about how advocating for those experiencing homelessness draws us into an awareness of God's action in and around us. Kevin Nye works in advocacy and homeless services, now in Minnesota. He's the author of the book, Grace Can Lead Us Home, a Christian Call to End Homelessness. He also writes on the intersections of theology, justice, and equity, and pop culture. And yeah, we're going to get into some of that too. And if you're watching the video of this episode, you'll see why right off the bat. This is a revealing conversation about our attitudes around the unhoused and how we can be better ambassadors and experiencers of God's grace. So listen for these revelations in our conversation with Kevin Nye. Kevin Nye, thank you so much for joining us on the Compass Podcast. How goes it with your soul today, Kevin?
It's pretty good, I should say. My family and I just recovered from our second round of COVID, so glad to be back in the world. A little residual, congestion and scratchy throat, so you might hear that if you're a really good listener.
If you're really, so the whole family got it?
Yeah. We all get it together. We get it.
A family that, I guess, stays together really stays together. I hear it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've been spurred to this conversation and through the book that you've written, and you open that one in starting with a story that I think we can all relate to. It's one of being approached by an individual who is apparently dealing with homelessness. Like, all the context clues are kind of there, and you go through your internal dialogue of what you're going to do when this person gets up. Can you explain for us a little bit, like, what made this particular situation that you shared an aha moment for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting is it wasn't an aha moment until much later when I was thinking about it, which I think I say in the book is kind of a through line for my life, is that I have very significant moments and don't realize them until much later.
Yeah, several weeks later, you're like, man, that really was something.
Yeah. I think it was even not until I was writing the book and I was like, what's a significant moment in my life that I could write about? I was like, oh, duh. And so, the context of that particular interaction was that I was leaving early from a church gathering of my denomination, where they were. It's a service they hold every year to celebrate those who are being ordained. They, go through that official process, and everyone claps. And earlier that year, I had stepped away from the ordination process, and that was a really hard decision and a really long, difficult journey. But ultimately ended up being the best thing, but also came with a lot of hurt. And so I was attending that service. I left early, and at that time I had already been working in homelessness services for about 6 months, and had started to kind of see it as, maybe this is, my career. This is what I'm going to be doing instead of ordained ministry. And so as I was leaving that service, there was a gentleman in the parking lot who very clearly to me was experiencing homelessness and probably some form of mental illness who approached me, and we had a conversation. And again, like, this is reflecting on it now, it's such an aha moment. Like, I was leaving, as literally standing in between the streets and the church, having this interaction that sort of signified the two parts of my life that at that time felt like they were kind of competing or in some sort of dialogue for my identity and my future. And and I finished the conversation. I went home and literally thought nothing of it until months later.
You used a word there that I want to touch on, and we did a whole episode here on the Compass podcast about how much words matter, why words matter with Jonathan Merritt. And you point out that we should be particular about the ways that in which we refer to the homeless and the unhoused, or persons, actually, as you put it, persons experiencing homelessness. Why do we need to watch how we use that reference, homeless?
Yeah, I think we should be mindful about the language that we use and what's happening in our minds and kind of in our souls when we use it. I don't go so far as to tell people what to use, and part of that is because the phrase that's falling out of common vocabulary is referring to people just as homeless or homeless person. But the people that I still hear using that the most often are people who are experiencing homelessness. Okay. And they seem far less concerned about the language by and large. So for that reason, I don't police other people's use of those words. But I use different words for particular reasons that I've learned from some others. And that's, I'll use people experiencing homelessness because that's person first language. Okay. It denotes an experience that a person is going through rather than kind of an identity marker of who they are. Also can kind of connotes that, it could be a temporary experience rather than a permanent identity. And then I'll also use unhoused instead of homeless. And while they really do the same thing in a lot of ways, I think that homeless has been in our vocabulary for so long and has been so associated with particular stereotypes and tropes that using a word like unhoused, even though it means largely the same thing, kind of just, jogs our brain loose a little bit from that stereotype and causes us to just think a little bit differently.
Yeah, it does feel disruptive in a way that we get so, I guess almost, there's so much stereotype attached to the phrase homeless person, right? But a person who is experiencing homelessness or even the unhoused interrupts that cycle a little bit. We begin to remove some of those connotations that we've held on to before. So is that really what lays it on for you and why you lean into those particular phrases?
Yeah, exactly. And also for me, unhoused is different than homeless, because homeless sort of frames a home as, a possession, or a commodity that someone should be with or without, rather than when you say unhoused, it sort of speaks of housing as a verb, which I think more connotes housing as something that we owe to people within, a society.
Talk to us a little bit about that. You mentioned that housing is a right, not just a luxury or something that we earn. Was there a framework that kind of inspired that thought process for you?
Yeah, I mean, so in homeless services, we talk about a methodology called housing first. And that is the belief that the way to end homelessness is with a home, right? And it sounds so simple, and yet for so long we've practiced this particular methodology where people have to gradually earn their way toward being housed, and that's through compliance with rules or a particular treatment program, or they have to essentially prove how much they deserve to be in a house, right? Housing first does the opposite. It says we're going to put you in housing first, and then we're going to surround you with the supportive services that you need to accomplish a lot of those same things, whether it's treatment for substance use or mental illness or help in finding a job. That actually housing, a place to call home, and the intrinsic safety that provides a baseline where people can actually accomplish those things and move toward flourishing in their lives.
So in that housing first mentality, is for you, Kevin, was that spurred by practicality, or was that mentality, housing first, spurred by your faith?
I mean, it's both all at the same time. I think I latched onto it immediately because of my faith, and because I have been so moved and convicted by, the grace of God and the justice of God, and really the words of the prophets who, are super clear about how we treat people. And frankly, the Bible has a lot to say about property ownership and land that we tend to over spiritualize, but that actually is pretty nitty gritty about whose the land is, and how land should be returned to people after they've lost it, and how it should be allocated fairly. And so, the notion that, people should be offered an opportunity to flourish, not based on whether they prove that they're worthy of it, but simply because every person deserves that baseline of care, absolutely speaks to me as a person of faith.
Well, I want to take you back to that moment in the parking lot. And I guess that story just connected with me so much because I've been there, and even feeling that moment of indecision when you see that person approaching, that they're going to have a request and you'd love to be able to help, but there's that gnawing feeling, that voice in your mind that says, I can't do anything, right? That reflects a scarcity mindset. Your writing reflects very much an abundant mindset, a mindset of abundance. What has inspired your abundance mindset?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's my faith commitments, and especially the writings of Walter Brueggemann have really shaped my beliefs about abundance and scarcity. And Brueggemann is so good about really getting you to this very spiritual level of talking about how, God, when God creates and when God gives, there's always enough. There's always enough to go around. There's not a shortage. The shortage comes when we, fail to allocate it in a just and equitable way, or certain people seize more than what is rightfully theirs, right? And for me, it's very apparent to me every day, because I work in this field, that we do have a scarcity of a lot of resources. I think that scarcity is manufactured, but it is one that I still have to work within, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are certain resources that we don't often consider resources that we do have in abundance. And I think when we talk about things like community and relationship and grace and love and care, these are things that we do have an abundance of. And so often when we are entering those conversations, the one in the parking lot, for example, he didn't end up asking us for anything.
Okay.
He talked to us for a while, and then when I moved to cut off the conversation, he just went on his way. And that doesn't surprise me, because that happens a lot where folks do just want to talk. And that's not to say that you're not going to get asked for something in the midst of that, or because, I mean, if I were in that position, and I was having a good conversation with someone and I needed money, I might drop that in the conversation too, But I do think that, regardless of whether we are, willing or able to offer those tangible resources in a conversation like that, we do still have a lot to offer.
Well, tell us a little bit about how the scarcity mindset is manufactured, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I think, for example, we talk about this housing first model versus the sort of prove your worth model. We spend, as a country and as individual communities, so much money to just maintain homelessness exactly the way it is, whether that's, spending money on cleanups, on policing, on incarcerating people for crimes that we have invented to sort of police homelessness, right? Whether it's loitering or shopping, having a shopping cart or sleeping on a sidewalk. These are all laws, like crimes that we've invented to make being homelessness harder or punishable, right? And then we have to pay to enforce those. We have to pay people. We have to pay courts to process them. We have to pay jails and prisons to, house people who break them too many times. We pay a lot of money for the healthcare for folks who are sleeping outside and all of the disease and wounds and things that come from that hard life. We end up spending a lot of money to not house people. Yeah. And when we actually have taken the time to study what would happen if we just house them instead, the money ends up being either equal or we end up saving money by housing people. And so that's just one way of talking about, like, we think that there's a scarcity, like, oh, who's going to pay for it? How are we going to afford to house all these people? It's like, well, actually, we're spending a lot to just keep doing things the same way. And it's a scarcity of imagination, and it's a scarcity of believing that people are worth investing in that way.
The story that sticks out to me is one that you shared through Malcolm Gladwell about $1 million person. And then it costs $1 million to really support this person experiencing homelessness. And it would certainly cost a lot less to actually provide a home for that person. And that was a light bulb moment for me. You also share in your book that in 2018 in Los Angeles, you had a bang up year and 21,000 people were provided homes. But on the flip side, there was something, my numbers may be off here, but something like 54,000 people who were lost homes, moved into homelessness.
Yeah.
Does it, in terms of your work, what does that do to your mindset? I mean, how does it feel to, as one pastor put it feels like hell is winning. Do you feel like hell is winning in a situation like that?
I do. And, we talked before we started recording about what brought me from Los Angeles to now living in Minneapolis. I do think that I lost a lot of hope in Los Angeles over the last 3 or 4 years. When I first got into this work in 2016, we passed a couple really crucial ballot measures to provide housing and then support it with a lot of money for services. And then I just over the next several years watch that money kind of get squandered or get spent working really hard, but to try to go against a system that was too big. And like you said, we were in 2018 and 2019 and 2020, we housed more people than ever before in those 3 years, like year after year. And yet more people were experiencing homelessness for the first time every single one of those years too. And so in one sense, like, God help us if we hadn't housed all of those people, because then the numbers would have just been astronomical. But, we need a complete renovation of how we understand housing, especially in somewhere that's as expensive as Los Angeles, and that has been really largely a housing market that's been really commoditized and corporatized and made unsustainable.
So what inspires you to keep going then? Are there practices that you utilize personally to kind of refresh your soul for this work?
Yeah. Moving across the country. Okay. No, it did
maybe
help,
a one-shot deal.
Yeah. Not something super replicable. No, I think I write about this in the book that at the times when I get just a little too overwhelmed by the enormity of it, I go small. And that either means that maybe I've spent too much time reading news articles or behind my computer doing like the big work, and I need to just go spend some time like eating a meal or drinking coffee or being in community with people, with the people that we're talking about. And that was built into my last job in a way that was just kind of who we are. It was our core identity that we were always holding that communal space. And like, there was a time every day called coffee hour where we like the only business we were about was hanging out and drinking coffee during that hour. Now it took a lot to run that behind the scenes, and I don't want to gloss over that, but there are plenty of opportunities during that to just kind of stop and say, no, I don't have to do anything right now. Like, my job is to have this conversation. My job is to hang out at this blackjack table and get to know these guys. And currently at my job, I'm finding new ways. I'm a little more on the administrative side at this job, so I have to seek it out a little more. But there's a young lady that lives in one of our housing complexes that is always hanging out in the lobby that I know at any time, if I need to, I can go challenge her to a game of Yahtzee. Right on. And that's just a way of resetting, that this is about people, and my job is not to end homelessness on a broad scale. My job is to, do what's in front of me, love the people in front of me, position myself in a way that can be in community and of service to the people in my immediate circle.
That's good. So it's in those relationships even that you're able to celebrate the wins, so to speak.
Yeah. And to see smaller things as wins. And I think, again, and I say smaller, with quotation marks around it, but it gets back to that abundance versus scarcity mindset. I think that as much as I want to see the numbers go in the other direction and homelessness to get smaller, even that can become its own form of scarcity and trying to celebrate or only pay attention to the numbers and not to, to people and quality of life, and to see, just to watch a person come out of their shell or watch a person take a step that for them is huge, but doesn't check a box on a government outcomes form, that's the type of stuff that I think an abundance mindset opens you up to, and that you only get if you can kind of slow down and take in the relationship aspect of it.
You relate a lot of this back to stories of Jesus, and oftentimes it's in a point of view that I had not considered before. Is there a particular story of Jesus that you feel inspires the abundance mindset, or even that you just go back to as a sense or a source of strength for the work that you've been called to do?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple, and there's a chapter at the end of my book that's about abundance and scarcity, and the two stories I really highlight of Jesus in that are when he turns water into wine at the wedding at Cana, and then the feeding of the 5,000. And those are two stories that are about abundance to me, because the first one, turning water into wine at a party is not meeting an immediate need of,
right.
That's
seems so extravagant.
Wine at a party is not on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And yet, it's true. And yet, joy, community, celebration, that's again, if we get out of that scarcity mindset that says we just need to check off boxes, get the numbers. Celebrating in community is one of the best joys that we have. And then the story of feeding the 5,000, I think there's such a great detail of that story is that there's just so much left over. That out of what seemed like scarcity, there's actually more than enough. And, if I feel like if Jesus were under a government contract for that story, he would have definitely made sure that there was only enough just for everyone to have a slightly full stomach, and
there were going to be prerequisites for them to earn it, right?
Yes, exactly. Because if there's some left over, then he's not going to get as much money for the next contract, right? And I tied that story back to, because that story echoes so much, the manna in the wilderness and in Exodus. And my favorite detail in that story is that the manna is described as having a sweet taste like honey. And I love that detail because, like, if God is providing this sustenance in the desert for people to get by, like, there's no nutritional value of making it honey or adding a sweetness to it. And yet I just imagine that just speaks to the God of abundance. That's like, I'm not just giving you what you need to survive. I'm giving you something to enjoy.
Yeah. And that's really kind of the message of grace, is it not? That it is so, on a personal level, it can be so, and abundant is not the right word. It can be overwhelming, or extravagant is probably the word that I'm looking for. It just feels like it is so much. Do you sometimes in your work of offering care personally for people, is it regular to hear people complain that you're just being providing too extravagant attention to individuals?
I don't think I've ever gotten that accusation. No.
Okay.
I think that it's, or if I do, it's sort of framed as, like, again, coming back to this idea of what people deserve, right? Or like, wouldn't that money be better spent, doing this? And obviously it's important to, steward resources well. And I wouldn't, want to, like, buy everyone an Armani suit instead of an apartment, right?
Right.
There's lines and stuff. But, I think that it's so important as humans in community to celebrate and to have joy. And I tell a story in the book, a couple of stories, one about making avocado toast for a bunch of our women on Women's Day, because it was that week a few years ago where all this discourse came out about how millennials need to stop eating avocado toast so they can afford to buy houses. And again, that just really got me riled up, because it's this whole scarcity and abundance thing that is so disconnected from reality and truth, but that was really just trying to say, like, hey, you millennials don't deserve to have nice things. And so I said, to heck with that. I'm going to make avocado toast and serve it to people experiencing homelessness this week. That was like my way of, countering that narrative. And then another story I tell is about a party that we started doing every year that, it wasn't related to a holiday. It wasn't anything other than to say that everyone deserves to have a party. And we got, like, taco catering, live music, photo booth, confetti, sent out invitations, and just invited everyone experiencing homelessness in Hollywood to come to a party in the morning on a Thursday in Hollywood. And it was always my favorite time of the year. And again, just based on this idea that every community needs, rhythms of celebration and joy. That's part of what makes us human. It's how religions and families, like, gather and measure time. It's just an essential core thing of humanity, and it's something that when you do have an opportunity to extend it to people who are often not on the guest list, you truly see how important it is.
Yeah. And so much of that stuff comes without terms. And I think that's what I was trying to get at with the idea of extravagant grace, is that it is something that comes without terms and prerequisites, right? And you seem to be a big proponent for offering assistance without a ton of terms on it. Can you speak to the people who have a different mindset a little bit, to the naysayers to that? Why is it so important to you to offer assistance without heavy duty terms attached to it?
Yeah, I mean, a couple reasons. I mean, one, from the practical side, it doesn't work. People don't change because they're, forced to or coerced to. People change because they want to, and they change into who they want to become. And I think that I'm going to keep coming back to scarcity, right? I think it's a scarcity mindset that says that people don't want to change. They want to be miserable. I think if we really dig down to it, that doesn't make sense, right? I don't think there's any person on this earth who doesn't want tomorrow to be a little better than today, who doesn't hope for something more in their life. And I think ultimately when we look at people who are experiencing homelessness and we say, they want to be that way or they deserve to be that way, and we need to find some way to hold something that they need hostage to get them to do something that we want them to do. And it doesn't work. Like, statistically, it does not prove the desired outcome. And even worse, when it doesn't work, we blame it on them rather than blaming the method, right? But when you do offer people without, like you said, without prerequisites, something like a home that provides that stability and safety, it gives people the opportunity to flourish on their own terms. And you, rather than saying like, okay, now I got you this house, now you owe it to me to do all of these things, you say, hey, now that you're getting good sleep, now that you have a safe place to call home, what do you want to do next and how can I help? And again, it's believing in people that people want to flourish. People want to take that next step. And we may not agree with what that next step is, but I would challenge any of us to look back at our life and ask ourselves if we went exactly the most efficient route to get where we are right now, and if we truly did everything in exactly the right order that would make sense to us now. People need opportunities to do life on their terms and to have partnership and support in doing that.
Well, we've been waxing theological, and I can't help but notice the wall of Spider-Man behind you. Is there a Marvel character or storyline that you find to be like a really good platform for theological themes?
Gosh, I'm always watching movies and reading stuff with an eye toward that. It's just like when I started working in homelessness, and I was like, how can I put this into conversation? I've always been doing that with movies, which were sort of my first love. And yeah, I'm a huge superhero fan. The Marvel movies, I think, are a ton of fun. I think the Doctor Strange is perhaps the most interesting one theologically, and it didn't surprise me when I found out the director of that was a Biola grad.
Okay, I didn't know.
Because to me, that movie is really wrestling with religious fundamentalism, and in Doctor Strange's world, it's what do you do with this magic? Do you use it to help yourself? Do you follow these rigid rules to a T so much that you become a villain? Do you flippantly use them to give yourself more power? Very much. You can tell, especially after you know that about the director, like, oh, this is a storyteller wrestling with a religious upbringing.
Right on. All right. I'm going to have to go back and review now. Having just seen Multiverse of Madness not too long ago, like you can even see it at work in there. Now, I don't even know if that's the same director, but
it's not.
Okay. But that theme is still there about the legalism.
Absolutely.
Yep. It's present. Wow. Well, you've just fairly recently made a transition to a new space to live in. What's next for you?
I'm settling in, and I'm enjoying the moment. My book just came out. It's less than a month old, and I have ideas about what I want to write next. But right now, I'm enjoying the heck out of people reading the book and writing to me and telling me how they're interacting with it, and I'm enjoying eating a bunch of new food in a new city and visiting as many lakes as I can and all that good stuff.
Every place seems to have their kind of specialized local cuisine. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and we have our own version of barbecue here. Well, we have hot chicken here, the Nashville hot chicken. What is Minnesota's dish of choice?
Gosh, that's a good question. I haven't figured that out yet. I did go to the Minnesota State Fair.
Yeah.
And tried a lot of those delicacies, a lot of different things that are on a stick.
Yeah. And fried.
But so maybe that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Thank you so much even more for the work that you're doing and for being able to and willing to share your perspectives with those of us who have questions about it. So it's incredibly valuable. And the book, I think, is going to open a lot of eyes, and it certainly has provided a lot of inspiration for me. So thank you for that as well. Again, a good spot to catch up with Kevin is at kevinmnye.com. And Nye is N-Y-E. My name is Ryan Dunn. If you'd like to catch up with me and all things Compass, check out umc.org/compass. A couple episodes you might want to check out while you're there that coincide well with this episode include Believing You Can Make a Difference with Street Chaplain Lindsay Crinks, who is also a friend of Kevin's, and a fresh look at Radical Jesus with Damon Garcia. That episode will get you good and fired up for seeking more actions of justice. Thank you to the good people at United Methodist Communications for making this podcast possible. And we are well into a new season of fresh episodes, so we'll have another fresh disruption for your day-to-day in 2 weeks. In the meantime, peace to you.